through which anybody that is speaking to you or teaching sees the world is really important. And so, like, what are the things that I'm thinking about while I'm thinking about Psalms? And I think that that matters and is worth hearing. So thank you again. I'm Rabbi Emily Hyatt, and I'm a Denver native. Which is pretty cool for me. I went to preschool at Temple Emmanuel, which is really neat for me. I did not grow up there as a synagogue. I grew up in a slightly more traditional household. I went to a number of more observant, sort of traditionally observant synagogues. And then I came to Reform Judaism, which is the more progressive arm of Judaism. It's one that really lifts up autonomy and choice and decision-making for each person through really good knowledge and understanding of things. I came to that much later in my life. The reason that I have an MBA, just FYI, is not because, I don't know, I'm really all that good at making budgets, but because there was a grant that was given when I was in one of my first jobs after college in the Jewish community, with the intention of like sophisticating some of the people that were working in the Jewish community. We all had MSWs and social work degrees for many generations. And they were like, that's awesome, you're really good with people. It would be great if anybody knew how to run a nonprofit. And so they sent, there was an organization out of the West Coast that sent 30 of us working for a youth group, a teen leadership organization, to business school with the understand we didn't pay a cent, and they made us promise that we would work in the Jewish community for 3 or 5 years after that, and like, I don't know, leak some of our business knowledge onto the other people that we were working with at the very least, so that maybe we could sophisticate the nonprofit world in the Jewish community a little bit, which I thought was pretty brilliant, and I'm grateful for that all the time. Other important things, let's see. Most of it, I think we'll get to if we get to it. I am a single mom to a 7-year-old. He is very funny and feisty. His name is Neil. He's the only Neil I've ever met under the age of 40. So I did that willingly to my own child. Take it for what you will. And we're going to talk about the Psalms. You'll bear with me. I got progressives. I can't see anything, whether I have them on or off, but I'll probably do a lot of squinting. I'm not used to them yet. And I put some slides up here just because I think that in our tradition, it's really important to have the text with us. Some of it's going to be really small, and so I'll squint at you and you'll squint at me and the slides behind me, but at least that way we have the same text that we're looking at when we're thinking about the Psalms. When I talked to Tina, she gave me a list of a number of Psalms. We're going to talk about, I think we're selecting from the burial Psalms that your community uses. And I had the privilege of listening to last week's live stream when you had a conversation in here about some of those Psalms from sort of an internal community perspective. I loved it. They were very funny for anyone that was here. They were very funny. And I got a kick out of it. And then of those Psalms, Tina had said sort of like, pick the ones that you like. So I did. So I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to talk about the ones that I don't know, I connect to the most or think the most about. And I titled this conversation, Speaking Our Own Language, because before we even get into any of them and think about where, I don't know, how we understand them, we're going to look at some of the big pictures of them and some of the like itty nitty bitty gritty pieces of like this word says this thing. How are we supposed to understand that? One of the things that always sort of stands out to me about the Psalms is that we wrote them. And by we, I mean people. Right? And when we think about the different texts and you think about the Hebrew Bible, we've got 3 main books, right? The first book we call the Torah. It has the 5 books of Moses. The second book we call the Book of Prophets, and it has a whole freaking lot of prophets that say a lot of things and a lot of different ways and in different iterations. And then we have the Book of Writings. And And the Psalms are in the book of writings, as you know, and the source of those books is a conversation that we have all the time, because the question of the divinity of our texts is one that, especially when we're talking about it in a Jewish context, really matters. And I'll tell you why. When we talk about the Torah, those original 5 books, right, Genesis through Deuteronomy, in Jewish tradition, originally, the idea is that Moses went up on the second of that book in the book of Exodus, and actually right where we are in our weekly reading of those 5 books, which we do annually every year. It's happening right now. Moses goes up Mount Sinai and gets the Torah. Receives those 5 books, brings it down, and gives it to the people. And there are lots of different ways that our tradition describes that experience in which, like, God wrote the books, right? God, had a Harry Potter moment with a quill and ink on parchment and wrote them. And Moses was like, sweet, thanks so much, and got the books and walked down the mountain and gave them to the people. And the idea of that divinity of that moment, that God, it's not just that God said it, it's that God literally wrote it and gave it. Well, that changes the way that we interact with that book, specifically and especially because those words are primarily, after we get through the first half of Exodus, words of instruction. Right? And remember that Judaism at its core is not just a religion or a culture or a tradition or a people. It's also a legal culture, right? We are given instructions and we do them. And so where pieces of that have been retained in Christianity, we all are really good about, we try to be really good about the don't murder ones and the don't steal and the don't covet, and we've all really adopted that. There's a whole lot of other instructions that are given in the Torah that we take so literally because God told us to. And so wrestling with the divinity of those books is a huge part of what we do, and especially in a more progressive context. I'm not sure that God, don't tell anyone, because we're on the internet. I'm not sure that God has a hand or a mouth or a brain, or I don't know that God writes. So how am I supposed to understand that God wrote the Torah and gave it to Moses to give to the people? I have to wrestle with that, and it's a good wrestling. But then we get to the Psalms, and we know we don't have to wrestle in the same way because we know that those are the words of people. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating the way that Torah text plays a role in our emotional lives, and it does. The words of the Torah and of those first 5 books are so deep in my soul in a way that I pull on them and need them and use them all the time. And isn't it interesting the way that we use Psalms in our moments of deepest humanness, like grief and burial and mourning and sickness? And we'll talk a little bit more about where we see those things, but they are our words. There's no question. The people wrote the Psalms. Which people? Dunno. That's a different debate, right? About was it David? How many of them were David? Can you tell from the language about the David ones or the not David ones? And that's a different kind of conversation, but at least we know that they were from people like us, living in experiences like us. Even if those experiences were unrecognizable to our modern world now, they still loved and they lost and they celebrated and they fought and they, did all of those things. And so we feel those words just differently than when we're trying to figure out whether those words came from God or people, because, I don't know, sometimes we discredit the people if they were supposed to be God. And in the world of the Psalms, we lift up that it was someone, a person who wrote it. So I am calling this speaking our own language, because I think that's what the Psalms are doing, is they are people talking to people about the world that we live in and how we navigate it. Now, just for a second, we're going to go to our first slide. Buckle up. There's going to be a lot of text here, and it's probably very small. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how the Jewish community sometimes sees the Psalms, which is very interesting. And if I'm standing out of the range of the live stream camera, just somebody give me the kick, because I don't want to go too far. I don't know where your camera is. So if you look at this, you'll see that we have certain psalms that we say on certain days. And the important piece of this is not which psalm for which day. It's just sort of like the hugeness of the list. And this is really just a piece of it, that we have psalms that we say every day. Right? A lot of those psalms of praise, Psalm 145 is really important to us, and I grew up really holding that and knowing that that is a huge piece of our tradition. Happy are those who dwell in God's house. And we have all these like really catchy tunes for it. Oh, thank you so much. That was a real gift. Thank you. We have all of these happy Psalms 146 through 150, right? I know that you probably have heard that like Psalm 90 on, they hit a little different. And that's where we start to we don't say hallelujah in the first 89 Psalms. We just don't. That word doesn't show up. Hallelujah, by the way, is Hebrew. Hallel, or Hallel is a word for praise, and hallelu is a command form of praise, and Yah is one of the many names of God in Hebrew. So hallelujah is like, do it, give praise to God now. Command form, but do it with a smile. Give praise to God now. Okay, so that only shows up in Psalm 90. And so we see that these are all a lot of these are later Psalms. And then we see that on Shabbat, which is the Sabbath, right? Friday night to Saturday, we have different Psalms. And on festivals and Shabbat, we say different Psalms than we do during the week, because that's like the regular, and now we get into the holy. And so we've got a whole different set, but we still say Ashrei. Happy are those. We're happy about God, okay? And then we say again, 146 through 50. So we get into those and we start to celebrate. There are different psalms that you say for each day of the week. So all of the ones that are above in those first two sections, those are ones that we say at the beginning of the service. And then at the end of the service, at our morning, we pray 3 times a day in the Jewish community. Traditionally, when we get to the end of the service, we have a psalm for the day of the week. That's what those ones are when you see the Sunday through Saturday list. And then we have different psalms that we say on Saturday morning versus on Friday night. Why? Hard to say. But because because we have different traditions that have evolved where we pull different pieces of the text that feels important. On new moons and festivals, we have a service called Hallel, which means praise, which we say on festivals because festivals are happy, right? And those are the ones that we say specifically at that moment. And then we have psalms for special days because festivals are not enough special days. We need a special days section. And those are psalms that we would say when we hit the new moon. We call that Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month. Psalms for the month of Elul, which is, that actually is going to show up again, which is the set of days. There is a month leading up to our high holy days. Rosh Hashanah, right, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement. That's a 10-day period. And then the 30 days leading up to that is we're working our way up there, right? We're getting ready for it. I know you guys have moments like that also where you're gearing up for the big stuff. We call that the month of Elul. That's the name of the month. And so we have psalms that we say in Elul. We have psalms that we say in a house of mourning, and we'll talk about some of those, which are different than psalms that we say at a funeral. And then we have Saturday night, Hanukkah, which is a fest, right? You know Hanukkah. There's other ones that we say on other holidays that are not major holidays, but okay. That was a fun tour, right? These are so many different things, but then I'll also, if we go to our next slide, show you that it's not just certain times that we say certain psalms. We also have this whole crazy tradition in which we use the psalms to really think about where we're at in our lives, because we have special psalms for moments, for different moments that we're in. And so this is also just a little hint of the total list. But we have, and this I took from Tehillim is the word for Psalms. It actually comes from Hallel, Tehillah, right? In Hebrew, those roots all relate. You just hear the similar sounds that I'm saying. So Hallel is that word right from hallelujah that we said that means praise. Tehillah, right, is a word of to give praise. Tehillim is the noun form of that, of those like psalms of praise. Okay, so we have ones that we say for the sick, ones that we say at a person's grave, at a time of war, at times of grief. When we have, oh, my columns got messed up, sorry, for when Israel, which could mean the state of, it could mean the people of, right? We use those interchangeably. So we call the Jewish people Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. So sometimes when we need, I don't know, special moments, when there are moments of protection or danger, there are psalms that we say. The Tehillim for livelihood are like if you are worried about money, you say certain psalms, right? There's one for everything. There are all-purpose times of need psalms, right? And so it's so interesting to think about how often these might show up in Jewish tradition. And I meant to bring it, but I forgot. I actually have this copy of the Psalms that I got in Israel. It's this big. It's so cute. Because the idea is that there are Psalms that you say all the time. And that if you're worried about something, or you're happy about something, or you're sad about something, or you're whatever about something, there's a Psalm for that. And so, like, of course, there's a little book, right? Like a purse-sized book that I might have with me. And if you were to ride on a bus in Israel, you would see probably Orthodox women, right? Ultra-Orthodox women who are reading probably a book of Psalms. They just carry them all the time and read from them all the time because there's words in there that they, I don't know, might need, might want, might feel moved by. So the Psalms show up a lot in Jewish tradition. And I would say the average Jewish person who's walking around knows a lot of lines from Psalms that they don't know come from Psalms, right? Because they are also parts of our liturgy that we excerpt all the time. And so there are little pieces that are tossed into all kinds of prayers and songs that we know that might not be, like people might not be thinking about the sources. That's true for all kinds of texts, right? That there are lines that are taken from different parts of Torah or different parts of different books of prophets that show up in our prayers. Because those prayers happen to be in Hebrew, right? It's not always clear. It's probably not always clear if you're not looking at the sources in English either, where those come from or where you can source them to. So with that, we're going to get into the Psalms that we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with Psalm 27, which is going to pop up in a moment, and it's probably going to be tiny, but that's okay, because the point is just that we have this text that we're looking at together. I put the whole thing in here. And so of the Psalms that I was given, for the Psalms that you in your community are looking at as burial Psalms, I picked 4. I picked them because I like them. And because they're my favorites and they resonate with me the most. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about what I know about them and why and how we understand and hold them. The first one, and I just went not in chronological order, so I'm just putting them in any random order. The first one is Psalm 27. And again, I'm going to pick out not just the whole psalm and how it shows up in Jewish tradition, but also the particular parts of that show up for us in really strong ways. So this is not a psalm that I have ever used in a funeral. I use the same 3 psalms over and over in funerals, partially because I think that especially in my community, the ones that are recognizable and that we use the most often are the ones that bring the most comfort. Right? So that's not a place where I'm going to introduce a new piece of text. I'm gonna always use the ones that we talk about the most often. It was helpful when I dropped this and it went out of order. Okay. But Psalm 27 actually for us shows up most strongly in a context that doesn't have to do with mourning, but in a context that has to do with what we were just talking about on the high holidays. And so we start to sing and say this psalm pretty regularly when we hit the month of Elul. So let me tell you about that trajectory that we go on for a minute and then how this psalm fits into it. When we hit the first day of the month of Elul, it comes after 6 weeks of mourning. So we have this really, like, the Jewish calendar is fascinating. In the middle of the summer, on the 9th day of the month of Av, we have a day called Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av, in which we acknowledge the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, 2 of those, right? The 2 destructions, and the fact that we don't live the way that we used to as Jews. We were put into exile for the last time in 70 CE. And we mourn that even still, not so much in the Reform community, but in general. And so we work up to that 9th of Av, and then we have to come back from it kind of gently. And so there's this whole lead up and then let down from that. And then right after Av, we hit Elul. And Elul is when we start getting ready for the high holidays, knowing that they're coming. And, I'm sure that there are jokes in your community about like people who just show up for Christmas and Easter. And for us, when you show up for the high holidays, they're 10 days apart. So it was really strategic in your community that you put those at least a couple months apart so that people have 2 touch points throughout the year. We like to do it all at once, right? So everybody you come in September and then we'll see you next year. But the high holidays really are like a touch point for even Jewish community members who are not like so tied in. And it's this 4th verse that shows up for us so strongly in this high holiday preparation. It shows up on the very first day of Elul as we get ready. And so we have 28 days, like 4 weeks of working our way toward Rosh Hashanah, toward our new year. And it says, Achat sha'alti me'et Adonai ota avakesh. There is one thing, just one thing I ask of you, God, which, by the way, not true, because we just saw the list of things that we could ask God for, and then there's safety, protection, finance, children, money, right? Like we have a huge list. But Echad sha'alti, one thing I ask of you, God, and then it says, Shivti b'veit Adonai kol yemei chayai, that I should live in the house of God all the days of my life. That's what we ask for. That's what we start asking for when we hit that like run up to those really holy days, right? And then we say we want to gaze upon the beauty of God in God's house. And that's what we say over and over. There is one thing I ask of you, God, and that is to live in your house, to be close to you, to dwell in your house. And what's so interesting about all the settings that we have, the liturgical settings that we have of this, they are all like so soft and personal. And they're not like, there's no bop to these ones. This is like, I'm asking you, God, just to be near. Which makes sense. We're getting to these holy days, right? Yom Kippur, this Day of Atonement, like we are laying ourselves bare in front of God and the community. All of our mistakes and sins, we're going to roll them out and just leave them laying there for God and hope that we find, right, atonement and forgiveness and all this stuff that we are seeking. And it makes sense that we're going to ask God, just please, just like, don't abandon me. Keep me close. Let me be close. And if I've been far, I'm asking to come back, which is beautiful. What's fascinating about that is that our actual high holiday liturgy is like huge and dramatic and intense, and it's not about like sitting quietly in God's living room together and just sharing space, right? You've probably heard some of these because they like get turned into, like big, like Avinu Malkeinu, Barbara Streisand, thank you so much, right? That is like our Father, our King, right? And the majesty of God and the hugeness of God and the awe that we have. But right now, what we're saying is like, I just want to like come in the door. And so this starts to set the stage for our closeness to God. And then that second line that you see that I bolded right there, that is verse 9. Don't hide your face from me. Al tastir. Right? Don't hide from me, God. And it's this whole idea that, I don't know, I kind of hope that God is not hiding because that feels like a relationship I don't want with God. Like maybe sometimes I hide because I'm a human and I'm fallible and I get embarrassed and weird and insecure and I make mistakes and I think like, oh boy, how am I supposed to show my face? But why would God hide from me? But we say it. We just want to be there face to face, right? In closeness. Now, I will tell you, and maybe we'll come back to this in a second. I'm going to note, because it was actually one of the things that was pointed out last week also, that we start with the idea of Adonai Ori, that God is my light. God is my light. Put a pin in that, because I think it's going to come back for us in a number of ways. So we're going to just hold Psalm 27 there. Let's look at the next one that we have, and we'll come back and tie these together at the end. But our next psalm is Psalm 121, and this is one of the ones that is all the time at the funerals for us, all the time. Psalm 121, I turn my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? Now, especially in Denver, right? This one means something to us because if you ask most people, like, where do you feel God? I would say more often even than I get in our sanctuary, which is like pretty big and majestic and celestial and like moving. The answer is like when I'm hiking with my dog, when I'm skiing, right? When I'm on the chairlift and it's quiet and I'm in the middle of the mountains, right? People feel the majesty and the bigness and the awe of God here when they are in the mountains. And 100%, I get that, 100%. So from where will my help come? I turn my eyes to the mountains. Now, somebody in last week's class asked about this one and said, what's with the mountains / hills, right? Are they hills? Are they mountains? And why are we looking at them? And what is that supposed to mean when they were talking about the mountains? So I thought and one of the things that was asked, and that is such a cool part of all of our traditions together, is that we're reading different versions of this, of everything, right? Because we know that translation is interpretation, right? We say translation is commentary. There's no way to make any translation of anything without infusing your own idea into it. So, right? Shir lema'alot esa einai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. That first verse, Shir lema'alot means a song for ascents, right? Hama'alot is like the heights. There are a lot of psalms that start with that. This is the second of them. It starts in Psalm 120, where we start to talk about the heights. Okay? Shir lema'alot, the second one. Esa einai, I lift up. Einaim is eyes, my eyes. El heharim, to the mountains. So if we are lifting up our eyes and looking at the mountains, we know that we are necessarily where, geographically speaking? Are we on the mountain? No. Why? Because if we were on the mountain, we would just look at the mountain. We would open our eyes to the mountain, right? If we're lifting it, the idea is that we're probably at the bottom. Okay? So then what does the mountain represent? And the answer is all the things at very different times. And so last week I heard Can and Katie, I heard Can and Katie talk about how the mountains were probably pretty dangerous. Amen, right? You ever try and drive in the mountains? No, thank you. Okay, right? The mountains represent a different topography than what we're used to. So they represent, 100% danger and bigness and majesty. Last week in our Torah portion, we read about Mount Sinai and how when God showed up at Mount Sinai, the mountain trembled and we saw the thunder and we heard the lightning and the whole mountain was in smoke. Right? It's like this big, giant, crazy, whole thing that we feel sometimes overwhelmed by. So the mountains are danger, but also the mountains are a very strategic military vantage point. So the mountains are also safety. If you're on top of the mountain and everybody else is below, who's got the better spot? The people on top of the mountains, 100%, right? So being up high is also a position of safety. There's another interpretation that if you are standing and looking at the mountains, it is a reference to the mountains or the hills of Jerusalem, and you're outside of Jerusalem. So it's not about your sort of military advantage or even your safety. It's about the idea that it's closeness or distance from God. If God is, right, in Jerusalem is this idea of where God, resides, or the temple is there, where we feel close to God. If we're lifting our eyes to the mountains and we're far from them, maybe we're feeling far from God. And it's a request for closeness, just like we saw in Psalm 27, or it's an acknowledgement of our journey to closeness, right? We're on our way. We're coming back. We lift our eyes because that's the direction that we're going. And we lift our eyes all the time in our text. You probably recognize that, right? Abraham lifts his eyes all the time when he sees something or knows something in an important moment. There's also, and I'll blow your minds with this one, because in Hebrew, we like to do things where we attach words to each other that may or may not actually be attached because they sound alike. We do it in English too. It doesn't mean that it's, right? When we do this, it doesn't mean this is what it means. It doesn't mean that this is what the intent was. It means, look, we have found a similarity here. Maybe the comparison of these two words is going to give us an understanding that we wouldn't have thought of, that will open our minds to something we didn't expect. The word in Hebrew for parents is horim. It's the same letters as the word for mountains. Right? Here we are. We lift our eyes to the Harim, from where will our help come? Well, now that we've got that connection, we could throw in all these other things. Our help could come from our family. We're not the first to feel this pain, especially because we say this all the time at funerals, right? From where will my help come? From all of the people who did this before me and who made it through. When I'm feeling loss or grief or mourning, that changes the whole of the text and our understanding of it, that it's not just about God or this about grounding ourselves in the relationships that we do know and do have, and hopefully for many of us, right, those parent relationships, or at least generational relationships, are ones that bring us great comfort or a feeling of security or a feeling of being taken care of or being not alone. So Psalm 121 holds a really special spot for us. If we go now to our next psalm, we're going to hit Psalm, except for that it holds a really special place for me because because of this one verse. Again, right? Now we're a couple into Shir HaMa'alot, right? Those song of ascents, a psalm of ascent. Shir means song, and Ma'alot is just like we read in 121, is like something about something being higher or us going up or us reaching for something. And maybe it's interesting because once we hit Psalm 90, even though we have some of these sadder psalms, we also get into the psalms of praise. So maybe we're going up in spirituality, in our emotional trajectory. We are 130 in, 20 to go. And then we are ripped from that reality because it says, Mima amakim karatich Adonai. Out of the depths, I call to you. We are not up high. We low. What are the depths? I don't know. We'll talk about that one in a second. These are psalms that show up for us over and over and in the Jewish community because we feel like we're in it, in the depths, right? In the depths of something. And so then we have all of these other words. And this particular psalm, which I love, is again, when I called this like speaking in our language, this is a person talking. So much this is a person talking, right? And maybe we read this as, I messed up, God. Right? Talking about forgiveness, talking about our sins, talking about being afraid and being redeemed and from our iniquities and our imperfections and just our humanness. Right? And so it's not always out of the depths of despair because I'm in the depths and maybe I'm the one that got me there, but it doesn't mean I have to be alone there. Right? And those depths right? There's a lot of language here that talks about where we're at, low, high, whether that's emotional, whether that's right on a journey of like a spiritual trajectory, whether it's literal, I don't know. So let's go to our last psalm. I'm going to connect them all through this one because it is my very favorite, and you know it well as well, I'm sure. And then we'll open it up for questions in just a few minutes. So Psalm 23 is important for all of us. I think there's maybe one person in the room who used a verse from this that like showed up when I was a kid in a rap song, and I don't think I put together all of the pieces of it, but he said, like, he uses this idea of the words of this psalm when I walk through the valley, right, of the shadow of death. That shows up in pop culture too. That illusion is so present for us. It feels so real to us. So what does this psalm say? It says, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures and leads me to still waters. God renews my life and guides me in right paths for the sake of God's name. And then there's this super famous line, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. My cup overflows. Only goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. So, I read this psalm a lot of times. I'm sure we all have. This is the one, I love that when you were talking last week about pre-planning for your funerals, that you get to pick your psalm. And I think that's such a cool idea. This is mine. So if, somebody write that down and tell someone, they'll do it. They always do it. It's fine. I don't have to choose this one. And I read it and I read it and I read it and I liked it always, maybe because of that rap song or maybe just because it's powerful. I don't know. And then one of my teachers said something. Part of my story as a human is that I found out that my mom had terminal cancer when I was 37 weeks pregnant with my first and only child. And it was awful and terrible and garbage and scary. And that's not a time when you want big news. You don't really want that news ever, but it's really not a time. And the process of the next 18 months was a lot. And in that process, one of the other things that happened is that I met the folks at Temple Emmanuel. I hadn't intended to be a congregational rabbi, and Rabbi Foster, who's our rabbi emeritus, and it changes the way that you understand the whole world. It was one of those moments, maybe just because I needed it, or maybe because it really is as brilliant as I think it is. But here's what he said. He said, we understand this psalm to mean a specific thing, which is that we are talking about what happens when you die, right? You die and then you go to this valley. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil because now I'm with God. That's one of the things that we say about what happens when you die. And Rabbi Foster taught me that our sages teach we're the ones left behind and we're the ones that we're talking about. So now let's read it again. As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I don't have to be afraid because God is with me. And this idea that when we lose someone, we're the ones that go into the valley. We're the ones that go down. We're the ones that are so low. And in a Jewish house of mourning, that's especially true. We take the cushions off our couches and we sit physically low because it reminds us that we're not supposed to feel normal. We're supposed to feel absolutely. And then there's these other pieces of the language in this particular psalm that just really then speak to us. What do we know? I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. What science, right? What do we know about shadows? There is only a shadow if you have light. And sometimes the light gets blocked, but there's only a shadow if there is also the presence of light, which reminds us so many different things, including one of the things that we are obligated to do in Jewish tradition when someone dies, which is to eulogize them. It's an obligation. We're not allowed to not eulogize, to tell the story of their life and to talk about them, because the thing that we have to bring, even when it feels like it's shadowed and blocked, is that light. And the other word that is so important in this, it says, Gam ki elech begetzal mavet. Elech is the me version of the word to walk. It is even when I walk through. That is an active verb that says, I'm walking through. I'm on the through here, because we don't stay in the valley. And so one of the things that I think is the most beautiful about the fact that we say this at almost every funeral is that it's a reminder that this is the worst it's going to feel. We've just lost someone. We are in the deepest depths of our grief, and we don't stay there. We walk. And what is the first line of this again? God is my shepherd, I shall not want. And even as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I am not afraid because you are with me. We don't walk alone. And I think it's true of any culture, but specifically in Jewish mourning traditions, one of the things that's the most powerful for us is that we're not allowed to mourn alone. There are prayers that we are obligated to say at funerals that you need a community to say. You can't do it alone. And so whether we understand all of this as an invitation for God to be with us as we figure out this project of being a human, which is deeply complicated and overwhelming and hard and full of ups and downs, or whether we see God as being a part of, or maybe the shepherd of, or maybe, is represented by the fact that we do all of these things in community. In community, we're supposed to do them. We're not allowed to do these things alone, to mourn or to cry or to fight or to journey. All of them, we do them with community, and that is maybe God. So I'll tell you one more thing, which is that in each of these Psalms, there's a reference somewhere to the idea of light. And in this psalm, it happens that it only shows up in the word shadow, but shadow is a allusion to light. I know I'm going to go 2 minutes extra, but I'll stick around after. I know the live stream will end. I'm sorry. This idea of light, and I want to tell you this story that we have that goes all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve. Right? So we're out of the Psalms and back at the very beginning. And in the story of Adam and Eve, we have this idea that when, Adam and Eve are created on the 6th day. On the 6th day, God makes people. And can you imagine what it would feel like to be the first people? What a weird and overwhelming world to come into. And so we have this story in our tradition. It's not a real story. We call it a midrash. It helps us to understand things. That when the sun set on the first day that Adam and Eve were alive, they were terrified. because it's human nature to be afraid of the dark, regardless of who we are and what we know. They didn't really know that it was the first time that a person had seen the sun set, but they're terrified of the absence of light. And so they get really scared. But we also know that God talked to them, right, in the story of Adam and Eve. So what happens? God comes to Adam and Eve and is like, it's okay. I can help you with this one. Take 2 rocks and hit them together. And so what happens? Adam and Eve go and find some rocks and smash them together. And what do they get? They get a spark. But what an interesting story that we have. And it doesn't just explain fire. It's this interesting story that we have that tells us that in the very first moments of there being humans and a relationship between humans of God and God, and in the very first moment in which we have one of the things that is so present in all of our Psalms, which is human emotion, that we have fear and we have worry and we have, right, terror of the dark, and we have uncertainty and we have anxiety and we have this overwhelming presence of how am I going to get through this? God looks at Adam and Eve and says, let me show you how to make light. God doesn't say, oh, hold on one second and just like pull the sun back up because it's scary, which I don't know, in theory, God could do, right? That's the thing, that's if God is God. God could have done anything. God could have made like, I don't know, a really cool flashlight for them, whatever. God could have done all kinds of things, and instead God says, you do it. Let me tell you how you make light, you make fire, you make heat, you make warmth. And we have this idea in Judaism that those are also things that don't have opposites, right? Let me tell you, we talk about heat and cold, we talk about light and dark. It turns out there's no such thing as cold. You can't make cold, you just remove heat, right? Freezing cold is just an absence of heat. You can't also make darkness. It's not a thing. It's not its own entity. Darkness is an incremental absence of light. Total darkness just means zero light. The same is true of good and evil. There's no such thing as evil. It's just incremental loss of good until you have zero good. And the Psalms tell us that all of this is in our hands. When we think we need God, need light, need comfort, need salvation, need redemption, need forgiveness, every bit of that is in our hands. That's what we're being taught by these Psalms and why they come back again and again and again, because we can do it. God gave that to us. All of that power and ownership and autonomy and strength, we do it. We walk through the valleys. We come out on the other side. We find the light. We make it. We see it, because all of it was given to us in our hands by God, and we're reminded of that by the people who have been through it before. So from where does our help come? We turn our eyes when we are in the depths, and we want one thing, which is to not feel alone and know that there's going to be something on the other side. What do? We look up at the mountains or at the people who came before us and who know how to navigate their way through these moments of despair and difficulty and hardship and loneliness and grief. And we know that we will come out on the other side if we do the work. Thank you. I left you only a few minutes for questions. Go.
Okay, questions?
You got one back there?
I've got one.
Okay, and then you've got one over here too. Hi. Oh wait, I think we have turned on. Yep, it's on. Good, great.
I'm Judy.
Hi.
Hi. This is less a question than an observation. And what you're describing in the fullness of understanding the Psalms, we're moving from the first person, the Psalms are written in the first person, I shall not want, to the corporate, to the we, the community. And it's just kind of an observation and that how critical the nature of the Psalms is in community, in the corporate understanding, as well as the individual understanding.
100%, 100%. And that is, right, like you could spend your whole life looking at one word and understanding it, and especially when we're looking at these words and looking, right, at, does it mean mountains or does it mean hills or does it mean parents, and is it safe or is it unsafe, right? All the options. And then you get into the structure of the psalm itself, which I almost talked nothing about because I picked up those lines. But when do we transition in those from, and we talk about the I and then the we, and then we talk about the first person and then we talk about the second, it happens all the time. Read into that. I love when we read into these pieces and we learn something new about how we might see how this lives with us. And I think sometimes you don't see it until you need it, right? Like you see the thing you need at the moment you need when you are trying to figure out how you navigate through.
I'm Mary. My question is, that list you had of the Psalms for different events, is that published somewhere? Is that something we can easily find?
Yeah, and I can send you like a better, more whole version because I just like clipped a piece of it. And different traditions have different answers to that. So it's not a universal truth. And if you like if I look in the front of my tiny Psalms book from Israel, it also has a list that might be similar but not 100% complete to that. If you are reading a woman's book of Psalms, which is a thing that exists, you might find really different categories because they're going to talk about Psalms that you say when you want to be pregnant, when you don't want to be pregnant, Psalms that you say when you are pregnant, Psalms that you say before childbirth and during childbirth and after childbirth, and when you're weaning your first child and when you're sending your first child off to the chuppah to get married or whatever it is. There's Psalms for all of that. And so what exists in our tradition is like, yes, different categories of this, but also different people who came before us saying, this is one that helped me in this moment when I was having a transition in life and I needed a little help getting across that transition. Here's a thing to say, right? And so certainly I'm happy to like send to Tina, to send to whoever, a list of some of those that exist. But you could find a million. It's cool. I've left them questionless. Amazing. Well, certainly, I am available if anybody wants to like email me a thing that you think about tomorrow. That sometimes happens. Is you're like, I was thinking about this overnight and I realized this, and sometimes you just sit with it. And I gave you a lot, and I talk fast. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. And if you want to ponder, and I know I'm really pondering the whole absence of good being evil thing. If you want to go back and ponder everything, please remember that all of our Dean's Forums are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. If you need any help finding them at any time, please just email me. We will pick up at 10:30 for worship as usual. Our service of Holy Communion, choral sung, I'm not saying that right, but begins at 10:30 in the cathedral or right here at sjcathedral.org. Thank you so much, Rabbi Emily, for being here. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.